Welcome back to this series, and let's continue with our journey into this new world of coding. Today, we will look at the basic code structure of the JavaScript, which is the first thing we have to know before we move forward. Remember this code? Console.log, hello world. This is called a statement. And if I write alert, hello world. Both lines are statements. Usually, statements are written on separate lines to make the code more readable. As time goes on, programs become more and more complex. It becomes necessary to add comments that describe what the code does and why. Comments can be put in any place in a script. They don't affect its execution because the engine simply ignores them. There are two types of comments: multi-line comments and one-line comments. One-line comments start with 2 / characters. The rest of the line is a comment. It may occupy a full line of its own or follow a statement, as you can see here. // this is a comment. Multi-line comments start with a / and an */ and end with an asterisk and a /*. The first and most important concept in not just JavaScript but in any programming language is variables. In the world of information, everything is stored in the form of data, but the question arises, where will you store the data after using it? Whether it is in the form of processing, giving inputs, or transferring it to someone else, we have to save it somewhere, and that somewhere is known as a variable. Just imagine variable as a box and your data as items you put into box to store it. I'm going to declare a variable now. Previously, in the old days before ES6, we used the var keyword to declare a variable, but there are issues with var, as you will find out later in the course. So going forward from ES6, the best practice is to use the let keyword to declare a variable. Now we need to give this variable a name or an identifier, and this is like the label we put on a box, so I'm going to give it this name. And finally, to terminate this declaration with a semicolon. Now let's log this on the console and see what we get, so console.log name once again. We need to terminate this statement with a semicolon and save the changes. And here in the console we see undefined, so by default, the variables that we defined in JavaScript have no value. So I'm going to set this to a string, like Rick. We see Rick on the console, so here in this example, we have declared a variable called name and we have set that to this value for this string. We have some rules for naming these variables before that. These rule applies. First, they cannot be a reserved keyword. As a result, let is one of JavaScript's reserved keywords. You also have if-else, var, and so on. You do not need to remember this list. If you attempt to use one of these names, for instance, if I change this to the reserved keywords. If you see the red underline, this is showing that this is not a proper identifier or keyword. Okay, let's just revert it back now. Then the second rule is that it should have meaningful names, like meaningful label, just so that other programmers can understand your code. The third restriction is that they cannot begin with a number, therefore a variable like 1 is not allowed. Name, but remembering the second guideline, why would you want to call it a variable 1 name? It has no meaning. Therefore, always choose names that make sense. The fourth rule is that they cannot contain a space so if you have multiple words you need to put them together. Here's an example. Let's say we want to create a variable named first name. You'll see that I'm using camel notation here, which means the first letter of the first word should be lowercase and the first letter of every subsequent word should be uppercase. We refer to this as camel notation. The last thing you need to know about these variables is that there are two ways to declare multiple variables. You can declare them on one line and separate them using a comma, as in first name and last name. In this case, both of these variables are undefined because I haven't initialized them, but you can choose to initialize one or both of them. The modern best practice is to declare each variable on a single line, so we end this first declaration with a semicolon and declare the second variable on a new line. I can set this to Rick and I can leave last name undefined or set it to last name equal to Sanchez, but the modern best practice is to declare each variable on a single line. Variable declared using const are called constants and their values cannot change or they cannot be reassigned. Let's see what happens if we try to reassign it. Let's say const name equals Rick. And now try to give other value to the name, say name equals Morty. And console log out. See, it throws an error, can't reassign the constant. In next session we will look at data types. For now, comment what you want to learn and how I can make things much easier for you. Stay tuned.